Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Big Blend Radio Success Express Show. Supervision is what we're talking about today. Supervision, but really leading, and we're going to talk about leading for social justice. We met Rita Sever a few years ago when she released her first book, Supervision Matters, 100 Bite-Sized Ideas to Transform You and Your Team. Her latest book is Leading for Justice, Supervision, HR, and Culture. And we're very excited because she's joining us as one of our Big Blend expert contributors. So you're going to hear her on Big Blend Radio quite a bit with segments talking about supervision, HR, definitely talking about social justice, right? And at the same time, she'll be on some of our panel discussions and I'm sure some of our fun radio parties. But in the meantime, go to our website, supervisionmatters.com. So welcome back, Rita. How are you?
Hi, it's great to be back. Thank you for having me.
And this time we get to see each other. It's just more fun.
It's way more fun.
That's true.
You know, leading for justice, I think this is important. We're getting more into social justice as a country. I know mostly nonprofits, right? But then there's also companies and startups that are going, we need to have that element in doing good. And some companies decide to stay like a corporation. Don't ask me all the legal stuff with that, but they're there to do good, but then decided not to be a nonprofit. But either way, it's still a business and you still have a team writing this for social justice and organizations. I think it's interesting because just from what we know in regards to nonprofits, that sometimes you get so stuck in the work of what you're doing that you can really run in the ground just in burnout emotionally sometimes because you're working in serious issues sometimes depending on what you're doing. But you can burn out and sometimes that HR part and that come on, we're a team thing goes away. Is that part of why you wrote the book?
Absolutely. Yeah, I work with a lot of nonprofits and social justice nonprofits in particular. And what I saw over and over was that there was such passion and commitment to fighting oppression in the world that sometimes the staff felt left behind and were left feeling like, what about us? Don't we matter? And so that's really part of what prompted me to write this book is about walking your talk internally as well as externally, keeping up the great work you do in the world, but bringing the focus on justice internally also. So yeah, being coherent as a team and being intentional about your policies and practices and culture.
And what about the hiring part when you look at HR, the diversity of people coming into an organization? Are you finding that it's happening within these social justice groups? Are they hiring in a diverse mix of people, obviously based on their qualifications, right? Because you can't just go hire diversity, right, without the qualifications. Because I have to say that because someone's going to say something just now.
Right, absolutely. Yes, you absolutely can't build justice by discriminating against anybody. So no matter which way you're going to be fair and appropriate in your hiring. And yes, I think a lot of organizations, nonprofits in particular, but every organization I think is looking to build their diversity in terms of staff demographics. So there's a couple of things that I would say about that. One is that it's wonderful to do that and to be thoughtful about that. And that's not enough. Just bringing in people of color or changing your demographics or LGBT or however your diversity shows up, just doing that isn't gonna be enough to help them stay. Often I see organizations bring in diversity, but then people leave within 2 years because they don't feel supported, they don't feel included, they don't feel understood or heard, and it doesn't work for them. And so they leave, especially if they were brought in with a commitment from the organization that we're going to walk our talk, we're going to really live out the justice values that we support, and they don't experience that, then they end up feeling betrayed, and so they
Mm.
leave.
You,
So
you
that's
make me, yeah, you make me think of companies that I worked for years and way before we were self-employed. And the word token comes
Right.
to mind, and it's a really bad word, but I mean, there were companies I worked for that hired token this, token that, and token this, so that they would look to be multicultural and embracing everyone, but in their actual practices, they
Right.
weren't.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
the culture didn't change, the
Yeah.
mindset didn't change, so people knew they
Yeah.
weren't really welcome. They knew they were tokens.
Yeah,
And that
and the
was
word
not a
was
good feeling for anybody.
no, and the
No.
word, a token is something that,
That's terrible.
yeah, I know, it's just a,
That-
I just
I mean,
remember that.
And that's actually, you bring up a good point of, and exactly this is our language has changed up so much. And um, I mean, I don't know what to say anymore. Since you're not even allowed to say cockpit of an airplane anymore. So, I don't know. So we have this new language coming, which is, there's a lot of positives to it. And so within these organizations, isn't that also like we have to, the language has to change?
Right.
Yeah, the language.
Yes, we have to be intentional about how we use our words, how we use our
Mhm,
pronouns, how we talk about people and our colleagues. All of that is very telling of a culture.
mhm,
And beyond that, of course, changing our practices.
Mm.
One of the things I talk about in the book is the idea of hidden rules,
Mm.
that they're not written down anywhere, they're not even spoken, but people know what you're supposed to do. And the typical hidden rule in a social sense is like you go to a fancy dinner and there's 5 forks and you don't know which one you're supposed to use. That's a hidden rule that tells people whether you belong there or not. In our organization, there are rules like that also that we don't talk about, but whether you know them or not shows people like you feel like you belong or you feel like you're being judged. So that's part of what we need to do, is uncover our hidden rules and lay them out or change them or whatever we need to do so
Mm.
that we can be more welcoming.
Well, it's also like you're saying, how
Mm.
to handle it, like with pronouns, with the language. It's, how much of it is, continuing education with change, like reading books like what you have for Leading for
Mm.
Justice, in that, understanding that, because these things happen and then we're like, why are people putting pronouns on their email addresses, their email signatures? Like, what is that? So,
Right.
Yeah.
their Twitter handles and things. So, and if you ignore that in a nonprofit organization, you're not, you've got to stay with it, right?
Right.
In that, especially
It-
in HR.
mm,
Especially, and on the other side, people need to understand why that matters. It
Mm.
can't just
mhm.
be like, okay, this is a new rule and everybody use your pronouns. You
Yeah.
need to explain why it matters, that people, it's hard for people when they are mispronounced, and it makes them feel a little less valued, sometimes a lot less valued. And so we want to
Mm.
honor people by hearing who they are and how we should talk about them.
Mm.
So organizations need to explain that, not just issue a rule.
But it's
Perfect.
interesting how the English language and other languages as well change up according to movies and books and all sorts of things that happen. They change up quicker, but the ideals and our values seems they're changing just as quickly, if not even faster. But for some reason, that part, it gets in the press, but it doesn't seem to catch up as quickly as other things when it comes to writing and movies and things like that. Like movies are pretty good. They're like, oh, this is new, let's get on it. But I feel like when it comes to books, when it comes to we're a little bit behind always.
I think that is the nature of our culture, that the new ideas emerge often in practices first, and then the
Yeah,
media captures up. Occasionally
Yeah.
it's the other way around, but usually I think it's sort of a grassroots change
Mm.
that happens, and then the language and our art catches up.
Oh,
Uh,
you know what? I think the arts, thank God for the arts, because they tell the
Yeah.
truth of the times, you know?
right,
They really
absolutely,
do. But I look at you know, the whole Me Too movement, and
Mm.
some, unfortunately, some women did the wrong things with it and took it and abused what was the beauty of what was going on. Not that
Mm.
it's beautiful that we had to have them, saying that it was a shift and a
They
change and a
ruined it.
positive change. Some did, you know, and I don't care what it is in the world. There's always that 1% or 2% of someone taking it and ruining a little bit. But in that movement, we saw so many men and so many, the laundry was coming out, you know,
Mhm.
but I did see some very high up nonprofit people end up in that mix. And I mean, I was like kind of flabbergasted, like what? And they voluntarily said, yep, I gotta go. And I couldn't believe it. And I don't
Mhm.
even get into their names, and because but I was shocked to see some nonprofits that I
Mhm.
held up here in values.
mhm,
Um, and it was crushing. I mean, we're talking
right.
about animal rights. I mean, we're talking about, like, yeah, there was just certain people I could not, I was just shocked,
Well,
you know, that,
because don't forget, nonprofits to be successful have to be run as a business. So when you're looking at
mhm.
running a nonprofit, you have to embrace the business side. You can't just embrace the good part of
But
the
that,
goal.
that,
And so when you're looking at people who work for a nonprofit, if they don't embrace the goal and have the business sense, then they're not really going to be
mm,
maybe that helpful, depending on the position that they're going to work in.
but you don't have to be ending up being one of those dudes.
Right. Yeah,
No,
that's definitely an example where they weren't walking the talk. They weren't in alignment with the
right,
values of their organization. And that,
yeah.
again, staff feel betrayed, and customers,
Mm.
supporters, donors feel
But,
betrayed.
and
Oh,
that's
yeah,
a huge deal,
absolutely. It's a
because if you're,
big mistake.
it's a huge mistake,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
quite frankly, how many conversations have we had about donating or supporting a nonprofit? And you
Mm.
go, "Oh, it all goes to admin, and then we hate the admin. And why do you hate the admin? Where is that? I mean, you have to have the admin to make things work,
Right.
right?
I
So,
think of admin as the skeleton of the
Mm.
organization. It's not
Mm.
visible, but if you don't have it, the
you don't,
organization
nothing's
can't
gonna
work.
work.
It's not
Right.
going to
So
Who's
I
work.
doing
don't
the
think of
research?
admin as a bad word, but I know that often comes up in donations. But
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
because
it keeps the boat running.
you want someone to answer the phone, like,
Right.
or
But
do you want them always out in the field? So there's that. But the HR
Mm.
part, I think, is interesting, because we never think about that nonprofit wise. Oh, here's the HR department. Because as far as I've always heard, it's like, oh, you have to go to the HR department. It's like going to the principal's office, man. It's like you, and
Right.
then if you have to go beyond the HR, like now you're being suspended from school.
Exactly. And that's one of my big pushes. I want to change that idea of HR, because
Mm.
I have been an internal HR person. And in my view, HR is about supporting the staff to do the important work that nonprofits are doing. And so I have a very different approach to HR than the police, which is what
You're
it.
supposed to be the medium. Like I
Well,
know,
well,
like a lot of
yeah.
attorneys want the HR people to be the person that helps with these rules, so that there isn't, sexual misconduct or anything, you know what I mean? That there isn't discrimination. I mean, that's what the HR
Right.
person is, to actually stand up for the employee, right?
Yes, to protect both the employee and the
And you,
organization. And I think
exactly.
there's so many ways to do that. There's the compliance part, but there's also listening to staff. What do you need?
Mm.
How can I support you? How can the
Mm.
organization support you? When we write a job description, how can we make it engaging and interesting and appropriate in terms of the amount of work? And how can we
Mhm.
keep the mission in front of people, and so many ways that HR can really both help support the staff, keep the organization safe, and I talk in the book about how can HR operationalize these values of
Mm,
justice and
that's
inclusion.
important.
And
Mhm.
it's in a very important position if HR can do it intentionally. If we don't do it intentionally, then we're just going to be replicating the dominant
Yeah,
culture, which we know isn't
We're
the
tired of
best.
that,
that.
Right?
We're
no, we
tired of
don't
that.
want that.
Listen, we
No,
are.
and then there's also age appropriate, because when you read a book, you read from your own experience. Okay. And
Mhm.
so the older you are, the more experience you have. You read things and you answer in your own mind, well, this is this and that happened, that happened, and yeah. And then if you have someone reading the book who really maybe hasn't even held a job yet,
Mhm.
there's going to be two different reactions to what's in the book, and that goes across board to any book. It's the level of the reader. Where are they on the scale of understanding and being able to assimilate without arguing, assimilate without, not that you don't want them to have their own ideas, not saying that, but I mean, when I'm reading your book, I'm like, oh, I know who that is, and I know who that is. So totally can
Right.
name people, right? Now, somebody
Right.
younger who hasn't held a job is not going to be able to go there and know that person. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. They definitely will approach it in a different way. They might
Right.
have stories attached to the examples, but they have the idealism and they know where they want to get and how they
Mhm.
want to get there. And
Right.
so I think they can use this as a roadmap almost.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's what I would
And
say. I wish I had it.
yeah,
That's how I kind of felt, was I wish I had this before I took certain jobs.
yeah.
Right.
Well, and
And
this
I
is the
think,
other part too. Yeah, where you're going for a job, you need to have that, you know, in that knowledge so you don't take the wrong job.
Exactly.
yes, and in the book, I try after every topic, every section, there's
Mm.
questions about how to make it your own. And if
Yeah.
people of all different ages and backgrounds and cultures
Mm.
can talk together about those questions, it can only help build understanding and recognition and respect for the
Mhm.
stories we bring to the table.
Mhm.
And
I
Right.
think
then
this
build
is
from there.
also good beyond the nonprofit, that there's so many startups coming up now, and a lot of them are doing, it's like if it's a food thing, trying to do fair trade versus, mass production that's really bad for the environment. If they're doing more of a personal thing, I mean, we know a company we interviewed recently, and they're not a nonprofit, but you would think they are, because they're
Mhm.
working to fight poverty and women in Africa. They're doing an amazing, Fair Trade Friday. Everyone just look it up. The Fair Trade Friday is a club, and it's a subscription box you get, but it's made by women in Africa that are nonprofits. So they sell what these women are making, and it goes back to women who were abused or raped and are now have, kids to take care of. And so they're just doing an incredible job, but they're not a nonprofit. And so there's these kind of companies happening all the time now, people of different ages, but there are a lot of younger generations now going, we want to start companies that are socially conscious, environmentally conscious, and
Absolutely.
diverse. And we're seeing them globally, nationally,
Mhm.
locally, just small, but it gives them those tools to do the right thing. And when you start up, and I think that's what Nancy, what she was saying, I think that's so crucial. If you could have this handbook for what it is there, so you could have this. You too could get this book, Leading for Justice,
Mm.
Right.
supervisionmatters.com. Rita Sever, go get it. But it helps to start. And also, I think board members of these nonprofits need
Oh,
to read this, don't you think?
required reading before
Mhm.
you get on the board.
Right.
Isn't it important for the board to be part of this conversation?
Absolutely, because
Yeah.
they set the direction. They look at the big picture. Well,
Mhm.
in some ways, they look at the big picture. In other ways, they look at the small picture, but
Dollars.
they do have the power to change the direction of the organization, to support the direction, and to center the values again. And so I think they could learn a lot from the book.
And what about volunteers? Because that's also something where when you're working for a nonprofit, it's like you're not supposed to make money. That's not true. You should be, everyone needs to be sustainable. That's part of being
Absolutely.
socially just, right? Is sustainability. So someone, you may be, I mean, doctors make money, and
Mhm.
except they're not doing, they have a big insurance bill, but they have a lot. It's not just what people think. But that whole idea of if you work for a nonprofit that you should be like the starving artist is not true. And you have to be sustainable, but the volunteer, you can't be treated like a volunteer either. And that's something that I've seen in nonprofits where you can't really grow sometimes in there because it's almost like you're lucky to get what you want, even though you're seeing money come in from fundraising and that kind of thing. So sometimes growth is stymied.
Sometimes it is. Sometimes that's just a factor of how big the organization
Mm,
is too.
that's true.
Mm.
I've worked in one nonprofit where our executive director had the spoken value or practice of in, up, and out. And it
Mm.
was a little hard to hear as a staff member when she first started talking about this, like, you're going to push me out. But her philosophy was that's how we help build the whole sector, is we bring people in with experience to do the job, but we teach them and we grow them and we move them up in our organization. And then eventually they're going to go somewhere else and bring their skills, and that's good for all of us. And so that's one way to approach that. And I've seen a lot of organizations where people do come in as volunteers and then end up being hired by staff. So I
Mm.
think there is a lot of different ways to look at that growth and to help people build their own confidence and skills and experience.
Actually, I know a lot of people who have been
Hmm.
volunteers and ended up being at the top of the organization,
Right.
Well, it's
20
true.
years later or something, 15, 20 years later, and they found what works for them. I think volunteering is just such a good thing to do. You learn stuff,
Oh,
but
Absolutely.
yeah.
but you also have to be socially just with your volunteers. So does your book carry that part too, that it's not just the employees? Does HR ever get involved with that? Because it's still people.
Right, exactly. Yes. Volunteering, the volunteer department, when there is one, it can go in any number of departments, depending on the size of the organization. When I was an HR director, I did have the volunteer program under me. I've also seen it in development. I've seen it in admin. But wherever it is, there needs to be a focus on how can we help people help us, but even more feel good about their work, feel like let them know that they're contributing, because that's how volunteers are paid, in
Right.
gratitude and appreciation and knowing that they're making a difference. And so
Exactly.
that is important, that they are treated fairly and that they are encouraged to grow and that they can feel the impact of their work, not
Mm.
just, I mean,
I
licking
mean,
envelopes has its place, absolutely, but
Oh, I've done a
hopefully they
lot of
do
that.
more than that too.
no, I
Right,
mean, otherwise, why would anybody volunteer if they're not
Mm.
going to feel good about it?
Yeah, because
right,
there's
They're-
licking
they
envelopes, you
gotta,
don't see the person on the other side getting the envelope, so you
exactly,
miss that connection
but
sometimes.
you,
So
right,
that's
you
an
need
important
to
thing.
see the organization that you're volunteer for. You need to see what they're doing that's making a change for the better in the world. Otherwise, why would you bother?
mhm,
You really need to know what the company's about or the organization's about, why they're doing what they're doing, and how it's helping. To be
absolutely.
totally invested in it, if you're totally going to be a
Yeah,
volunteer, you need to you have to have that.
Mhm.
right,
And you have to understand the organization's goals.
absolutely. And that's true of admin too. When
Yeah.
I worked at an AIDS organization at the height of the epidemic, I was in administration, so I was in the background, but I would go to staff meetings and say, tell me a story. I need to remember why we're working so hard.
Yeah.
And it's not that I forgot what the mission was, but the stories make it real. And it wasn't, I didn't need to know who people were. I just needed to hear, we helped this person get housing.
That there's a
something like
result for your work.
Right.
I totally understand that. I've worked for mostly, well, animal-based nonprofits to help wildlife and animals. And if you don't see a result for your work, that organization is actually not just petting animals because it's fun.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It's got to be accountable. Yeah.
yeah, you have to see that they actually are in the money that they're making actually does do something in the field,
Right.
that it makes a difference. It can't just be paying for the animals they have caged on their property, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Absolutely.
Mhm. Well, on the accountability side too, when you are in these organizations for social justice, right? You could be one of those tireless workers and you could be seeing stories. You could be on the psychology side of it. You might be on the therapist side, but it can run you down,
Mhm.
what you see and
Oh,
what you're
yeah.
doing. And you can, like I was saying at the beginning, almost burn out. And does HR ever step in there to help and let maybe people just they need a break or understand that burden that you have when you're seeing so much? I mean,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? There's an emotional
Absolutely.
toll that can really happen with different kinds of
Right.
nonprofit work.
Absolutely. I think first HR can build practices to try to prevent burnout, first of all, because burnout happens again, not just when there is a lot to do, but as you're saying, when there's too much trauma, secondary trauma, sometimes primary trauma, or people don't feel like they're making a difference. They don't feel appreciated. They don't feel like they're making a difference. That's when burnout happens. So preventatively, HR can build practices that encourage people to take time off and take a break and develop trauma-based practices to support staff. That's why I'm such a big proponent of supervision, because the supervisor is the key person who will support people and recognize the signs of when they're getting to burnout.
But
And
it shouldn't be
so
looked down upon, right?
absolutely know
Yeah,
it to be tended to, and people need to be cared for.
it's like the
And
watchkeeper.
sometimes it's a matter of taking time off. Sometimes it's a matter of you do have too much to do. Let's deprioritize something.
Yeah,
And
it's
or
prevention.
however,
It's about
whatever
prevention.
practical intervention is to
Mhm.
help them feel supported and engaged so that they can hopefully come back and continue the work. And if
Can
not,
people,
take care of themselves and move on.
yeah, can people take on too much kind of, I want to save the world and need to be
Absolutely.
tempered?
Absolutely. I think that's
Yeah.
actually something that is fairly common in nonprofits and in any kind of heart-driven work, that there's always so much in front of us that needs to be done. If you're a hunger organization, there's always
Oh,
people
wow,
who
yeah.
are not fed. And so it does, if you're not building the culture that supports self-care and strategic practices, then people are going to feel like they have to work 24/7 and they're going to burn themselves out very quickly.
And they are
So,
gonna feel like, what did I actually do?
right,
Did I make a difference? I'm not convinced anymore that
right,
I'm making a difference. And it's up to the organization, in my viewpoint, to make sure that they understand what they're doing and how it is helping. And that when they need a break, they need to take a break. But they have to believe in the cause,
right,
and they have to believe that what the organization is doing is making a change.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And I think one of the practices I strongly support is organizations pausing to celebrate what they've accomplished.
Yeah,
Mm.
Again, both as individuals and as organizations, we're so focused on, the big mountain in front of us. We don't look back and see that we've climbed some hills. We are
Yeah.
making progress.
And
Mhm.
it, yeah, like you
Yeah.
said, when you're talking about a hunger
Mm.
organization, if you fed someone today and they got food in their belly, you've done something just with that. You've
Mm.
got to take each individual thing. It's
Right.
like, I know we take for granted, like I could just take a sip of my tea like I just did, and other people don't have that. And we've given to a lot of those
Mhm.
organizations, homelessness. I mean, everything we owned before we went on the road, we gave to
Yeah,
a
the
nonprofit
homeless
that
people.
helps people that are suffering homelessness and helps them get transition into housing and things. And when you go through that, you start to really look like, oh my gosh,
Get
I
it?
just took a sip of tea and they can't just do that. You know what I mean? But
Right.
you've got to
Yeah,
just go,
so
okay, well,
true.
this is what I can do,
Right.
but stay
And to
sustainable.
acknowledge, we fed 10,000 people last year.
That's amazing.
Okay, yeah.
If you
And
No,
weren't doing that,
we passed
10,000 people wouldn't.
legislation, right? We
Yeah.
passed legislation that is going to make a difference.
I know, because sometimes it's all about fundraising. We made this much in fundraising. I don't want to hear that. I want to hear just exactly what you said. We fed this many people.
Mm.
Right, right.
Or you want to know where the money's going, like, hey, we've raised this
Well,
much,
yeah,
so
but
now we can build this wing of the hospital, or
Yeah.
that kind of. So I think it is about accountability, no matter what. It is a business, and it's people. It's
Well,
the
it has
people
to-
business.
has to run as a business or it would fail.
Hmm.
And yet it doesn't have to run as a mainstream business either.
Exactly, not
we can
the.
still lead
let's-
with our heart and
Yes.
Right.
and which many businesses too. I don't want to say all businesses are bad.
Right.
There are many
No.
businesses
Oh yeah, there are.
that support their staff in amazing ways. But the way they are run, they both matter. And
Right.
absolutely, a nonprofit has to be attentive to the accounting of
goal.
that. But there are little differences too. So
Oh, there are. And I mean, we're a business, but we do good stuff.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But
Absolutely.
and there's, I mean, we could be a nonprofit.
With our tour, we could. I was gonna ask you this though, with
Totally.
going to social justice, because your first book, Supervision Matters, it helps nonprofits and also helps businesses. What was it for you that said we need to focus on social justice organizations and really empower them with your knowledge and with books? I know you also help organizations. You work with them primarily online. Yeah. What was it for you to do that?
So it was a combination of the organizations I was working with and hearing patterns from organization to organization of what was not working and what worked, and how staff was feeling like they weren't supported as much as they needed. And so that really made me think about, how can I help share my expertise in a way that can support these organizations and help them walk their talk, help their staff feel included and supported and like they are being treated justly. So that was part of it. And I had written about half the book when the pandemic hit. And so I had more time to devote to the book. And that, of course, is also when the George Floyd murder happened. And so many organizations were seemingly suddenly focused on the role of justice. And so I really thought for them too, that having some practical advice about how to do more than post a statement of support, to really bring those values into the organization in a very down-to-earth, practical way, that would be very helpful. So that was those two came together for me to write this
I
book.
think that's huge, because you
awesome.
talk about George Floyd and you talk about standing up. And when you're standing up, you need to have your foundation underneath you to be able to stand up, because
Mhm.
I mean, we obviously have racism just running rampant in our country. We can't ignore that fact. It's really
Mm.
true. And so if you're going to stand up for issues that really mean you're going to have to stand up and fight, then you need to have the foundation so that someone doesn't go, poke, that you crumble.
Right.
And so your team needs to be just as strong. I think it's invaluable. I mean, it's you can't fight the good fight, or
Mhm.
stand up and do so much to help homeless kids, or fight AIDS. We're still struggling with some of that. And now look at COVID. Look how many.
So
I
many
mean,
issues.
and we all know it just is a never ending list, right?
Mhm.
But you can't really fight it unless you're sustainable and strong as a
As a
your nonprofit should be a strong community. It is that,
Absolutely. Right,
with
Mhm.
good communication skills, I
right,
think.
right.
Yep.
And united for focus and commitment to the mission, absolutely.
Oh,
Mhm.
awesome. I'm so glad you wrote this. This is going to be
It's
fun.
awesome.
Yeah.
I know Nancy's been reading it, and I've been going through parts of
Mhm.
it, and
I'm
I know
like,
we're going to
yeah.
have some good conversations over the next few years, and really getting into some of the nitty gritty. And so glad you're part of Big Blend family. It's going to
Mhm.
be fun. So I
Yeah.
think with everyone going through changes, I think politicians and leaders should read this kind of material as well, because I
Absolutely.
think part of
Absolutely.
why our unrest in this country is that well, the trust is gone. And I think trust is really crucial when you put yourself out there, especially in these, if you're marching and you get, tear gassed, and your company needs to, or your nonprofit needs to support you, if that's something you're going to do together. People get arrested for social justice, standing up for rights. I mean, it's never ending, but
Well,
the political sphere, they haven't had they are not,
they're not.
as transparent and united as they could be to do what needs to be
No,
done. And so I
they're
think
up
this goes in
here.
there.
I think most people, and I know in other countries, feel exactly the same. The politicians, leaders, whatever you want to call them, are up here, and all of us are down there. And they're going to tell us what to do.
Mhm.
And they have never lived our life. They've always had a privileged life. They come from money,
Not
good
all of them.
family.
Not all of
No,
them.
but no, but in general, that is what people feel. I'm talking about what people think and feel. That politicians are rich, because you have to be rich to run for office, pretty much in most countries. And they come from the upper class, and they have not known lifestyle of other people at all. So how can they make laws that help the people in a country? So there's this risk based on distrust, because those making the laws are not like the people who have to live by the laws. Oh.
Yeah, but this is a distrust. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Like, the teamwork sometimes it doesn't connect with all of us trying to make change, so there's legislation that comes in with these nonprofits. But I
Mm.
think, being a public servant is pretty much like it should be a nonprofit, right? And so in a way, just a different way,
Mhm.
okay,
Right,
without all
right.
the legal terms and everything. But there's that transparency and trust. So does
Mhm.
trust
I
go
do,
into this?
absolutely. Trust
Mm.
is fundamental to everything we're talking about. If you
Absolutely.
don't build trust and listen to each other, leaders listening to their staff, to their um
Mm.
voting base, whoever it is,
Yeah,
then it's going to be hard to move forward together,
exactly.
especially with people who may think differently than you. We have to be able to listen to each other.
It's
Right.
just like,
We did,
filling out a survey, and you go and put, 1 star instead of 5, and then people just, oh, we got 1 star. Well, screw them. We're
right,
just going to only look at the 5-star reviews, right? You can't,
right, right,
instead of wondering why was that?
right,
Why are they
exactly,
unhappy?
right.
So in HR, are there principles or ways that people can come forward and communicate without fear? or feeling they're going to lose their job if maybe the boss is totally missing a huge portion and not hearing, you know, are there ways, that's the conduit, that's what HR does, is so you have to go to the boss and say, hey,
Mhm.
everybody's saying this about you, so you might want to
Right.
take a listen. So you have to be the in-between
Absolutely.
person. Oh my gosh, you guys all
Anytime.
need therapists.
HR can be a lonely place.
I
Because
bet.
you have to keep so much confidential. And you are in the middle in many ways, in the best roles of HR, you're in the middle because you want to support the staff. And I have absolutely had those conversations where I've need to tell people, you know, I have some feedback for you and I'm happy to coach you about this, but first let
Oh,
me,
wow.
you know, let's just talk about what the concerns are, and then we'll make a plan to move forward from here.
See, but that's a really
Mhm.
cool thing. Instead of going, so-and-so said about the blah, blah, blah,
No,
and
you
then
can't.
now you go
You
fix
can't do
it.
it
So
that
you
way.
work forward in coaching of what can
Right.
we do to problem solve and rectify. So
Right.
that kind of gets people, instead of, because nobody wants to hear anything that people are complaining about them.
Right, nobody
No.
wants to. And, you know,
No.
there certainly are organizations and probably even departments and people where I wouldn't even go and say, so-and-so said this. I would probably more say, you know, I've heard or I've noticed this is happening. Because even though I would be wanting to protect the person from retaliation, I might not even make it personal that way. I might make
Mm.
it more generalized feedback.
Yeah.
Because I do want to make it safe for people to come and talk to me without feeling
Mm.
they're going to be exposed.
Mhm.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Wow. So
Mhm.
lots of hidden secrets there. Well, this is going to be
Yeah.
fun, like I was saying. And everyone, Rita Sever, again, Leading for Justice is her latest book. The other one is Supervision Matters, and you can go to supervisionmatters.com and also see our expert page. And our first interview with you about Supervision Matters on blendradioandtv.com. We're looking forward to this. Now I want to
It'll
like
be
do
fun.
the undercover world of the HR staff. What do
Right.
they go through? That's going to be the next thing. Thank you so
Great.
much, Rita.
Well, I'm looking forward to our continuing conversation. Thank you both.
It'll be fun.
Awesome.